Let's think about taking some questions. If we want to ask a question, please raise your hand and a microphone will come over to you. There's a couple of people with a microphone in the room. And if you could announce your name and who you work with, and also make sure it's a brief question rather than an extensive statement. So while you're thinking about a question, Peter, do you envisage that the consumer right will be put into place in a mandatory sense, that is that both private companies and public sector agencies will be mandated and must provide you with that consumer information or your own information or your own data, however that's defined? Or would you go down the voluntary route first, as they did in the UK?
So I'll sort of have to a little bit take the fifth. The final report will tell you the specific answer to that, but I think you can see from the presentation I gave today, we have deep doubts about whether you would be able to, or you would be confident as a consumer, and therefore have a higher level of trust in the responsiveness of your provider if it was simply optional to give you that information. Now, it's not our natural space, the Productivity Commission, to want to use regulatory burdens to increase opportunity. We would very much prefer to find natural incentives, which is why I've also tried to spend a lot of time in this address and a couple of comments I've made in recent days on this, emphasising this term trust. It should self-evidently be in the interest of all large public and private sector data collectors that they have to induce this, and the better practice of those very, very large entities around the world that are deeply dependent on data, you know, your Facebooks and your Googles and people like that, they spend a hell of a lot of time in this. Not to say they always get it right, not to say, you know, they're perhaps in all their respects truly admirable role models, but this is a very big thing for them, and there will need to be solutions induced, and government has a part to play in this. I don't think government can certainly anymore expect that it can be seen to be exploiting the kinds of opportunities that are available with its own data matching and data analytics, and yet not say to the individuals that are the source of this, you know, there's an opportunity in this for you too.
And how do you see the privacy right sitting with the consumer right?
Yeah. So I think, as I said, some people did suggest we could simply take the definition from the Privacy Act, and as I pointed out in this speech, yet no one considers that their personal information is a tradable item, neither the firms nor the individuals. Thus, it's not going to reinvigorate any opportunities, and therefore it's not going to support this broader question of trust to simply use the personal information approach of the Privacy Act. It has been suggested to us that will create some kind of confusion. It's interesting, we're also doing a review of the Australian consumer law at the moment, and same proposition arises there too, as you well know. And it doesn't create confusion. It doesn't, because they have an approach called no wrong door. And therefore it doesn't matter how you go in and ask for it, and particularly in the case of our proposition, there is no right to transfer data, to direct a current data holder to send your data to another party under the Privacy Act. So should a firm or a government receive a request for transfer, it's self-evidently going to be a consumer data request, not a privacy. So we think there is actually some natural clarification that would occur with this. We don't think the proposition is so confusing, certainly to be such that individuals misunderstand it. And we doubt very much that the kinds of firms who would receive this data request, the kinds of government departments who receive this data request, are very likely to be confused at all.
We have a question over here. Thank you.
John Matthews, University of Melbourne. A number of us have struggled for years to get public sector data for research purposes in the public interest. And there's a perceived conflict of interest between public agencies in providing data because the economic or health problem being addressed. The answers might reflect upon the agency. Can you give us confirmation that you're trying to address that problem in the public interest?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I can. It's a core part of the report. I didn't put it in today, as you can tell. I don't know what people's norm is for these things. I try to keep them to 20 minutes, and I know I went over that, but it's a core part of the report. It's inherent in that section that I described at the outset, where I was primarily talking about our own experiences, and I did that because, frankly, I'm trying not to give away too much of what's in the final report, because I'm sort of tap dancing along a fine line here. The government hasn't got the thing, and I'm out talking about it. But you can be. Don't tell anybody. Don't mention it. But it's a core part of the report, and this concept I mentioned in passing of trusted user access, inherently in our model, we envisage the creation of accredited release authorities whose job it is to take data sets, link them, and see them provided to trusted users. Trusted users, in turn, would come from institutions that can establish that they are capable of exercising the kinds of controls and responsibilities that you would expect if they're dealing with either somewhat de-identified information or identified information, or indeed information with perhaps commercial in confidence characteristics to it. By acquiring the status of trusted user, the way we envisage it working, the institution would provide the assurances, the individuals would be designated as trusted users, and for the purpose of the data sets held by that release authority, all of the data sets, you'd have ongoing access. So it wouldn't be a question of project by project repetition of the same proofs every time to show that you are capable of dealing with this. So that's inherent in the draft report, and yep, there's a good chunk on it in the final report.
Thank you. We've got a question over here.
Craig Horn from the Australian Computer Society. Data ownership.
He's a submitter.
Right.
We love submitters.
Data ownership. It wasn't. You raised Fitbit as a great example of. Is it Fitbit the owner of the data because they manufactured the technology to harvest or collect the data, or the wearer the owner because they generated the data? Is it the PC's role to just raise a question? It wasn't clear to me whether you're actually going to go so far as put a position forward in a recommendation in the final report.
We will. Again, it will be in the final report, and we'll have a view on it. And the concept of shared data is the self-evident solution. You heard me mention in passing the Commonwealth's construct, which says if you're dealing with unit-level records and you come to a conclusion, you're nevertheless required then to destroy your data set, and I called it akin to burning books, and I think it is. It's a very strange policy, really. But we don't want to see data destroyed, you see, so we wouldn't want to deprive Fitbit of its data. But we don't want them to deprive you of the potential to use it either. And so this is the concept I think we're trying to advance. That it's that data should be shared, and moreover, we should get in and establish this relatively early on, even though it might look today with 29 devices, as I said, forecast to be in all of our pockets by 2020. Who knows, it may be a much larger number than that. It would be wise to have the policy construct established early on that if you generate it, regardless of how it was then collected, you continue to have a right to its utilisation. This is one of the great benefits of data. Many parties can use it at the same time, and its utility does not diminish. You can't sort of wear data out. So anyway, no, we will deal with that in the final report.
Thank you. We have a question down the front.
Vanessa Teague from the University of Melbourne. We were the research team that demonstrated that the 10% MBS sample could be re-identified. So my question is about the future of that kind of open publication of highly sensitive individual records. Where do you think that's going to go?
So we've got particular propositions for managing access to identifiable data in a secure fashion, and there are entities in Australia which currently do provide access to data in such a fashion, but it's quite hard to get inside them. So our proposition is to create institutions whose job it is to make it easy for you to get inside them if you are qualified to do so. In other words, we may see less need to release apparently de-identified data for research purposes if we can provide you with better access to the identified data in a secure manner and facility with security arrangements that your institution has signed on to, not just the individual researcher. In the draft report, we did actually say, and I found a number of universities who came to our hearings a little unaware of this, so I made something of it. I said to them, well, we expect not just you as the individual to sign up to how you will handle access to this kind of data, this very sensitive data. We expect your institution to sign up as well. And that means that their processes are such that we can be confident that the burden just simply doesn't fall on you as the individual researcher or your project team as the individual team. The burden's got to be supported by your institution if we're to provide better access to this kind of very sensitive data. Now, I don't think serious institutions, not-for-profit, public sector, even some I don't think they're going to have a problem with that. Once they can see that we're serious about providing them with access in return for it. In other words, lift your internal standards and we'll lift our barriers.
Unfortunately, we've got no more time for additional questions. We could go talking about this fantastically interesting topic, I think, for another hour or two, because I do feel that when we see your final report, it will be, I was going to say a watershed. I made a remark before you arrived, Peter, that we're swimming in data and we're awash with it. We're awash with it, and I'm now saying that I think this is a watershed, and I'm particularly interested to see how the consumer right becomes a reality, and also to see what the cultural change it means particularly for the public sector in terms of being much freer to provide information and not hiding behind that shield of restriction that perhaps I see sometimes is the case. So I'd now like to hand over to Michael Camilleri from CEDA to propose a vote of thanks. Thanks.